Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Record.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Andrew Bluestein, and I'm the Vice Chairman of Garfunkel Weil. I want to thank everyone who is in the process of logging in. I'm seeing the numbers going up because we have a very exciting presentation today by Tanya Friedman at Kinetics, and I want to introduce her and get right to it. But before I do, Tanya is going to be at our ASC seminar, so which is only 8 days away. It's next Friday. So for those of you who have questions that we don't get to today, you can clearly come to the seminar and go up to Tanya's booth. To encourage you also to come for today and tomorrow, if you log on, you can register, and we'll give you a code. We'll give you a code which will be able to be used and get a discount. And I will mention that code at the end, so stay tuned. And the seminar, you can look at the agenda. It's packed full with speakers, and if you happen to be an administrator at a center, then you can earn AEU credits by attending. So what we have done is listen to a lot of complaints from hospitals and ASCs and everyone who needs nurses and can't get nurses. So that's why when Kinetics approached us, we thought they would be an excellent complement and potentially a great solution to our problem. So without further ado, let me tell you a little bit about Tanya. She has been doing this for 25 years. She's the Chief Operating Officer of Kinetics USA. And this is really what she does all day and all night. She also has a bachelor's degree from a university in South Africa that I'm not even going to try to pronounce. I will let her take a shot at it. And she's the member of the National Association for Healthcare Recruitment. And we are very thrilled to have Kinetics and Tanya present to us today. And if you are looking at your slides, you should now be seeing the Kinetics slide. And at the bottom, you can also ask questions. You can put them in and we'll get to them. And somebody just wrote to me that they can't stay the whole time and they want the discount code. So I will tell it to you now before I let Tanya take away. So grab a pen. If you put in NYM, that's New York M, 18W. So it's New York Metro, that's the name of the symposium, 18W. That will get you a $65 discount. So with that, Tanya, take it away.
Thank you so much, Andrew. I really appreciate the opportunity. We're very excited to be here and to be presenting for everybody today. Very exciting to see the number of attendees going up, and we look forward to meeting everybody next week in New York as well. As Andrew said, my name is Tanya Friedman. I'm the Chief Operating of Kinetics. And as you will see in front of you, our first slide is a road. And the reason that we have a road is that, we would be working together on the journey to successful international nurse recruitment. I travel around the U.S. every week, basically. I mean, I'm really putting a lot of miles in at the moment, and meet with CNOs and CEOs and healthcare leaders. And the question that I ask many people is, what is the biggest challenge that you're experiencing right now? What is the problems, the challenges that are keeping you up at night? And really what the same answer is coming back time and time again, the shortage of nurses. We're really worried about the nurses. So looking at the international nurse recruitment in light of that, we put it up as a road because it really is a journey. The destination is to make sure that you have enough nurses according to the needs in your facility. But really, this is a journey because international recruitment is a true partnership. It's a partnership between the facility, between the nurse and the company, if you choose to use a company for your international recruitment. And it really is a long-term planning strategy, which I'm going to go through with you in more detail. For many hospitals, the international nurse recruitment is never going to take away from your current recruitment of nurses. It really is more of just like another tool in your toolbox to be able to strategize from a long-term perspective and create a pipeline of nurses. And I think the key word that hopefully you'll take away from the presentation today is looking at creating a pipeline, because this is not, for many people, for many managers, when they are looking for nurses, they are, thinking, well, I've got an OR nurse that I need and I need it today. International nursing is a little bit of a paradigm shift, because really what you're doing is creating a pipeline. So you are not, unfortunately, it's not a magic wand. It is a process, and therefore we have the road. We start on the road and we start on the journey. So a little bit before we get more in detail on the topic at hand, a little bit about Credentialing. We are the premier specialist for providing internationally educated healthcare professionals for direct hire to facilities throughout the U.S. So we work with acute care hospitals, surgery centers, skilled nursing facilities, rehab organizations, correctionals, really across the board. And we like to call ourselves career matchmakers, which means that we partner for long-term success with both the facilities and the RNs. And really we look at more of a holistic match. So we do, with every client that we work with, we conduct site visits. We have a proprietary white paper analysis that we do before starting any recruitment program, so that we can carefully assess which nurses are going to be the best fit for their organization. And it's very much, as I say, a holistic match. We have developed over the years several proprietary tools and methodologies to help the nurses to make a smooth transition to the U.S. As you might hear, I have an accent. I'm today a proud American, but I came from South Africa myself many years ago. So I know personally how hard this transition can be coming to the U.S. And we at Credentialing have a very strong passion for that, because it can be a very difficult journey when somebody arrives in the U.S. for the first time. And it really is very exciting as well to see, because we are also changing lives. And we're very passionate about that. And we have a lot of tools and methodologies that we use to try and help make that transition as smooth as possible. We have our own unique Rely program. R is for relocation, E is for employment, L is for licensing, I is for immigration. The message, obviously, you can rely on us. I hope you get it. And we recruit from many countries all over the world. So we recruit from Canada, Philippines, UK, Australia, New Zealand, South Africa, where I'm from originally, South Korea, Nepal, Middle East. Mainly nurses from the Middle East are Filipino Indian nurses, and India as well, in terms of the nurse recruitment. So why international healthcare professionals? Right now we know that there are several causes for this problem. Not only are we experiencing nurses retiring at a rapid rate, but schools aren't graduating enough nurses to be able to replenish the workforce. In fact, in 2017, the nursing schools actually turned away more than 56,000 qualified applicants from their undergrad nursing programs. So they really were rejecting students in droves. And exacerbating this problem, of course, is the aging U.S. population, which is fueling demand for healthcare services. So people are getting older, and we're all getting older, and as we get older, we get sicker. unfortunately. And in fact, I believe the stats were there are nearly 48 million people in the US, or about 15% of the population, who are currently 65 years of age or older. So there are several causes that we know are causing this problem. And because of the looming shortage, many facilities these days are exploring international educated RNs, as I said, as just an additional tool in their toolbox, another strategy to supplement their recruitment of RNs. And this solution can be of enormous benefit to healthcare leaders who are challenged with balancing the return on investment, patient safety, and retention issues. So moving to the slides, the American Nurse Association predicts that there will be a 1.1 million new nurse shortage by 2022 throughout the US. This is obviously a huge problem. From our side at Kinetics, I've been doing this for a long time, and we have many years of experience in this business. And years ago, we used to go in, when I met with healthcare leaders, we used to share a lot of the statistics. These days, we don't even do that. We just kind of get straight to the solutions, because obviously everybody knows there's an issue, and it's just about trying to find the solutions. So the growing nurse shortage has a number of implications for American healthcare organizations. Recruitment of RNs is increasingly flat or on the decline. I met with a CNO last week, and her words to me were, "We've hit a wall." And this is a common thread that I'm hearing from facilities all over the US. We've hit a wall. It's either flat or on the decline from a recruitment of American nurse perspective. And what is happening is that there are a number of implications. So increased usage of travelers or agency nurses, which has a huge impact on costs. I believe the statistics are that hospitals or surgery centers will spend $30,000 to $32,000 per nurse traveler per 13-week assignment. That is a huge number, and more facilities are using travelers or agency nurses in order to fill the gap. But as we know, that's just kind of a temporary band-aid. Another implication is concern about the skill mix. And this is a common issue that we're hearing from a lot of healthcare leaders as well. There are new grads coming in, but the ratio of new grads to experienced nurses is also very worrisome, because there are a lot of experienced nurses that are retiring. Another concern, increased nurse retention concerns. This is something that is very worrying because of the nurse burnout. A lot of nurses, because of the skill mix is out of sync, a lot of nurses getting burnt out, and this, in addition to the millennial RN turnover, is extremely worrying in terms of patient care concerns. So that obviously tells us we have a problem. And international nurse recruitment has a lot of benefits that can help in terms of this problem. So the first thing is that it can make sure that with international nurse recruitment, we can make sure that we have a more holistic match. So we're not just matching in terms of the clinical skills. So when facilities ask for a traveler, they are really just matching in terms of clinical skills. From a international nurse recruitment perspective, we are matching from both a clinical as well as a broader holistic perspective to make sure that we get the right match. We can recruit from top talent worldwide, and this can also be a big plus from a diversity perspective. It is a great retention tool. This is one of the best retention tools that anyone can implement from a nurse recruitment perspective. I would like to also share, we have a hospital system that we work with. It's a very large system. They have 46 hospitals in the group. They were actually sharing with us that they have a 96% retention rate on their international nurses. We've recruited hundreds of nurses for them. And they did a survey after 3 years, after the nurses have been there for 3 years, and it was actually 96.3% retention tool. So it can be a phenomenal retention tool. excellent return on investment, especially if you consider how much travelers cost. And also there's a new trend that we're finding just from a cost perspective is because the pie is shrinking with the nurses. Many organizations are now offering all kinds of attractive incentives to nurses. So we have in California, one of our clients was telling us that there is a hospital in Los Angeles that was just offering $25,000 sign-on bonus for operating room nurses. And the competition is obviously heating up. But on the international nurse side, we can have excellent return on investment. Another benefit is creating an ongoing pipeline of experienced nurses to supplement current recruitment. So we have many clients right now who have created this pipeline, and the international nurse recruitment does take a while because of many of the legislation barriers, basically from a licensing and an immigration perspective. So it takes a while for the nurses to arrive, but the facilities will then know that they have a nurse coming. This one's coming in 3 months, this one's coming in 6 months, this one's coming in a year, this one's coming in 18 months. We're actually working with a surgery center in New York City, and we were plotting out last week with the CEO when the pipeline of nurses are arriving. So it is a great strategic long-term planning tool where you can look at how your pipeline is trickling in over a period of time. And it is a way to build a stable workforce with solid skills ratios. Lots of S's in that sentence. And all of the above obviously enhance patient safety and care. So the next question I'm sure going through your mind is, well, how do we get started? Because it can seem like a very overwhelming and complicated process. I have one of our clients, a new client that I was working with in California recently. They have just signed up to do some international nurse recruitment, and she was really very anxious and saying that, it just felt very overwhelming, very complicated, hard to know where to start. And that's where I think I'm really excited that everybody is attending today, because I think that it can give you a very good bird's overview of the different pieces of the puzzle. So it's important to break this process down into a step-by-step approach and identify the key elements. And really, we've identified there are 4 basic key elements to international nurse recruitment. And you've got to kind of think of it as 4 main headings or umbrella topics. So the first is the licensing and credentialing, and I'm going to go through that in a bit more detail with you on further slides. The second is the immigration piece. The third is the recruitment and selection process. And fourth is the onboarding best practice, successful onboarding best practice. So under the licensing and credentialing umbrella, for want of a better word, there are a number of processes that the nurses need to go through in order to meet the U.S. credentialing requirements. The first is that they need to, seem to have skipped ahead. The first is that the nurses need to pass the NCLEX exam. Of course, this is the biggest barrier of entry because this is administered by the National Council of State Boards of Nursing, the NCSBN, which tests the nurse competency. And all nurses that want to come and live and work in the U.S. need to pass the NCLEX before they can start working and even start the immigration process. Another credentialing requirement is that if the nurses were trained in English, they don't need to pass the English exam, of course. But if they were not trained in English, they do need to pass the English exam. And there are 2 different kinds of exams that the nurses can take in order to meet the U.S. criteria. The one is called the IELTS, the other is called the TOEFL, and nurses need to get a specific required score in order to pass the English exam. So this can also give one peace of mind to know that anybody that is going to be working in the US coming from outside the country needs to, of course, pass the NCLEX exam. But if they were not trained in English, it gives you a peace of mind to know that they've had to pass an English exam as well in order to qualify to work in the US. Another piece of the puzzle is for the credentialing requirements is the visa screen certificate. And I'm going to discuss that in a bit more detail in a future slide. But just to give you an overview, the visa screen certificate is a document that all international nurses need to get from an organization in Philadelphia. It's a non-profit immigration organization called the CGFNS, and they will evaluate the transcripts of the nurses in order to make sure that transcripts and the educational background of the nurses in order to make sure that the nurses' education is equivalent to an American nurse. They will also make sure that the nurses pass the English before they issue that visa screen, if that is a requirement that they have not taken their nursing education in English. And then, of course, the nurses would need the license endorsement if necessary. So every state has a different requirement in terms of the process for the nurses to take the NCLEX. There are many states in the U.S. where nurses can't go directly to that state to take the NCLEX through that state. So, for instance, there are actually a lot of states. I'm not going to actually mention them all by name, but they are. The reason is because many of the nursing boards in the U.S. require a social security number in order to take the NCLEX. And of course, these nurses would not have a social security number because they are not yet authorized to work in the U.S. They don't have a green card or a TN visa or something like that. So how that works with international nurses is that there are certain states, and New York is actually one of the states where they can write without a social security number. And that means that if they're going to be working in New York, that's a simple process. But if they're going to be working in another state, then they would need to do what's called a license endorsement. And there is a process for doing that step. Still under that licensing and credentialing umbrella, a little bit more about the visa screen certificate. So the visa screen certificate is a document that we need for all nurses in order to qualify to actually apply for a green card or for a TN visa. And I'm going to go through in future slides a little bit more about the green card or the TN, but a bit more about the visa screen. So it is a certificate. It's issued by CGFNS. This is an immigration nonprofit organization that validates the academic credentials of foreign educated healthcare professionals. Once it's issued, the visa screen is valid for 5 years, and the nurses can renew it every 5 years. So they again have to meet the criteria for the visa screen, but it can be renewed. The CGFNS will confirm that the nurse's education is comparable to a U.S. nurse. So this definitely can give one a lot of peace of mind. In fact, most international nurses actually have a bachelor's degree. So some of them are actually even more qualified than American nurses, as many American nurses only have a associate's degree or diploma. As I said, if the nurse wasn't trained in English, the CGFNS verifies that the nurse is proficient in the written and spoken English, and the RNs must pass the NCLEX and be eligible to obtain a license in one of the U.S. states. So that's basically what the visa screen is. And we're moving now onto the second area or second umbrella, which is immigration for the RN. So there are basically 3 different scenarios or 3 different ways that a nurse can come and live and work in the U.S. The first is called the TN, the second is a green card, and the third is an H-1B visa. A little bit more about each of those. The TN status or the TN visa is a non-immigrant status. So important to differentiate that from the green card, which you'll see is an immigration process. TN is non-immigrant status in the U.S. for Canada and Mexico, and it offers expedited work authorization to citizens of these countries. So how the TN works is that if the nurse, for instance, is a citizen of Canada, they meet the licensing requirements, so they have passed the NCLEX, they have a visa screen certificate, and they have a job offer, they can come and work in the US on a TN. The TN is for 3 years, and they can renew that TN indefinitely as well. The green card or permanent resident refers to the immigrant process of becoming a lawful permanent resident. And there are 2 different types of green cards. So the one is a consulate green card. That is if the nurse is outside the country. So for instance, if I was speaking about the surgery center we're working with in New York, we have a number of nurses that we have that they have hired, and these nurses we have one that is in the Philippines, one that is in the Middle East, also a Filipino nurse, one is in the UK. So those nurses would be coming through on what's called a consulate green card, and they go through the consulate or the embassy in the country where they are based. But there is a different kind of green card as well, and that is called the adjustment of status green card. And that is if the RN is inside the US for some reason. So it might be that they are here, they could be on a TN, they came on a TN, they really like it, they want to put down roots and stay in the US for a longer period of time, and now they can do an adjustment of status because they're inside the US, they can do an adjustment of status green card. Or they are maybe a student, so it might be, they are here as a nursing student, and they are, they're finishing their studies, and they are then going to be wanting to get a sponsor, which is then would come under this heading of adjustment of status green card. The last category is an H-1 visa, which is an employment-based non-immigrant visa for temporary workers. And this can be granted if the position is considered a specialty occupation. So the H-1 visa is really more typically only used for specific occupations, like a nurse manager or a nurse practitioner. It really isn't applicable for a regular staff nurse. So from a kinetics perspective, for instance, pretty much most of the nurses that we work with will come through either on a green card or on a TN. And just a note also to mention is that only registered nurses will qualify for immigrant purposes. If the nurse is an LVN, or in South Africa we have enrolled nurses, in Canada we have LPNs. Unfortunately, they will not qualify for immigration purposes to come to the US. Only RNs will qualify. A little bit more about the TN under the immigration category. So registered nurses are one of the occupations that qualify for the TN under the North American Free Trade Agreement, the NAFTA agreement. As I said, this visa is available for Canadian and Mexican citizens for certain occupations only. So there is a list of occupations that you can Google. We actually have that as well available for you. A list of occupations that qualify for the TN, and RNs obviously are one of them. Just to speak a little bit about the Mexican citizens, the process for a Mexican citizen is a little different than for a Canadian coming to the US. Canadians can go through any port of entry, any airport, or drive through any of the borders. And the Mexican citizens have to go to a consulate to obtain the visa. So it is a little bit of a different process. But I would say, I've been doing this for many, many years, and we have brought a few Mexican nurses into the US, but I would say pretty much on the TN side, it's been Canadian. The reason for that has obviously been a lot of times is the language barrier. It's more difficult for Mexican nurses to pass the English exam, and obviously most of them were not trained, well, all of them were not trained in English, and that's the reason why we tend to see more nurses coming from Canada on this particular visa. So it is a temporary working visa. It allows the nurse to work in the US for 3 years, and as I mentioned, it is renewable. It's a pretty simple process. So once the nurse has all of the requirements, they basically will go to an airport or can drive through a border post with a list of documents we have. There's a specific format. So there's a specific TN letter, like a template that we have that the nurses, that the facility needs to send for the nurse to show that they have a job offer in the US. And then as long as they have all the different requirements for TN, they can get that TN stamped into their Canadian passport and come and live and work here. It's a very simple process. It costs $50, and it's pretty quick. So it's the easiest of the visas to work with. There is also a TD visa, and this is a dependent visa which allows the spouse and the children of a Canadian or a Mexican professional to join the TN employee in the United States as a dependent. It is important to mention that only children under 21 will qualify on the TD visa, and that the spouse can definitely come with the nurse, but the spouse cannot work unless they have an occupation that is also on the list of occupations that qualify for TN. So that's just an important distinction, because that's also obviously very important for us to make sure that we communicate with the nurses, with the facility, because the last thing anyone wants is for a nurse to arrive in the US, the spouse to come with, the spouse to expect that they'll be able to work, and then they realize they are on a single income and the spouse can't work, and all kinds of problems evolve from there. So very important for everybody to understand how these visas work and what the implications thereof. Also just wanted to mention, in October 2018, the newly renegotiated NAFTA deal became known as the United States-Mexico-Canada Agreement, or the USMCA. So the name for that visa has changed. Moving on to the next slide. So just to sum up some of the things we've been speaking about the TN in terms of the requirements and the process. So the requirements for the TN are that the nurse must be a registered nurse, no LVNs, LPNs, RPNs as they call them in Canada will qualify, must be a Canadian or Mexican citizen. And important is to distinguish that the TN is based on citizenship, not on country of birth, whereas the green card is based on country of birth, and I'll get to that in the next slide. But the TN is based on citizenship, and the nurse must have a job offer from a U.S. employer, and it is formatted in a certain way on the TN letter. We have that format, and we can help the nurses and help the employers with that. The nurse must have passed the NCLEX and must have a visa screen certificate from the CGFNS. To recap, the process is that once the requirements are completed, the Canadian nurse, and we say Canadian nurses because most of the nurses that come through on the TN are Canadian, but of course, this applies to Mexicans as well. But the Canadian nurse can apply for the TN at a port of entry, and the Mexican nurse must do so at the consulate. Upon entry to the United States, the nurse can then apply for Social Security, and in most cases, the RN will need to have the Social Security number in order to endorse their RN license. So, as I mentioned before, not all states, you can't apply to write the NCLEX or do an endorsement without a Social Security number at many of the states. So we need to navigate that on a per state basis. The TN, as I mentioned, is a simple process. It's pretty fast as long as the nurse has completed the requirements from a licensure perspective. So, still under the immigration umbrella, I'm going to talk a little bit more about the consulate green card. The consulate green card, the requirements of an employment-based green card sponsorship if the nurse is outside the country. And here I just want to mention that this is employment-based. So there are different kinds of green cards. The one we're speaking about here is an employment-based green card, and specifically we call it the EB3. The nurse must be a registered nurse, again, the same as for a TN, must have an employer or a sponsor in the United States. The position must be a full-time permanent position. The employer must pay a wage equivalent to the prevailing wage set by the Department of Labor for the area and the position offered. And in fact, the first step of the green card process is where we apply to the USCIS, which is the United States Citizenship and Immigration Service. for the prevailing wage determination. The nurses are required to pass the NCLEX and obtain a visa screen, so same as for the TN. There is an additional requirement that is optional, but many immigration lawyers are suggesting that nurses comply with this next step as well, is that they also obtain an educational equivalency report. There was a new memo that came out on September 11th of this year from the USCIS that they will no longer, in adjudicating green card petitions, that they will no longer give out what's called a request for further evidence or a NOID, notice of intent to deny, when they are adjudicating cases. And basically what that means is that previously, in months and in years before, when you submitted a case to the USCIS for a petition, if there was some document or some additional information that they wanted, they would send out what was called an RFE, request for further evidence. With a new change for September 11th, that kicked in on September 11th, the USCIS no longer has to do that. So there really is more, the officers adjudicating the cases have more discretion in terms of the adjudication. So what a lot of immigration lawyers are suggesting at this time is that we give additional documentation. So that's why we wanted to include that about the educational equivalency report. That is not something that's required, but a lot of people are including that in petition cases as additional information, so that we are hopeful that the cases will get approved. The consulate green card process goes through a number of stages. So the first is called the prevailing wage. After that, and that takes about 3 to 4 months to come back from the Department of Labor. Once that is approved, then the case goes to posting. The job is posted by the facility for 10 business days, and after that there is a 30-day rest period. Once the 30-day rest period is completed, then the cases are filed with the I-140 petition. So that's something that people will hear a lot if you are filing green cards, the I-140 petition, and that is where the facility will send in documentation, the nurse will send in documentation, and that will be filed with the USCIS. There is an option when you file a case to do premium processing. There's an extra cost for that, but if you decide to do it, the cases will be either approved or denied within 15 working days. Once they are approved, hopefully, the case moves to the National Visa Center, that's the NVC. Additional documentation is supplied at that point, and then the case will go to the consulate interview. And at the consulate interview stage, the nurse, the whole kind of petition will be approved, and the nurse needs to come into the U.S. within 6 months. Just as an aside as well, I wanted to mention that Kinetics have actually put together a video of the number of the different stages of the green card petition. We have one on the consulate green card, we have one on the TN, and we are actually in the process of putting one together for the next slide, for the next stage, which is the next slide, the adjustment of status green card. So if anybody would like to get a copy of those videos, it's just kind of like an animated video, which I think simplifies the process and just gives you kind of a roadmap of the different stages, because it can also be a little bit confusing in terms of the different stages of the green card. So we'd be happy to share that with you if you like. So moving on, again, under the immigration umbrella, we're going to talk now about the adjustment of status green cards. This is, of course, if the nurses are inside the country. So adjustment of status is the process that a nurse can use to apply for lawful permanent resident status when present in the United States. So for instance, it might be that the nurse is here as a student, Maybe they are here on a TN. Maybe they came a few years ago on a TN and they have now decided they want to stay and put down roots. So there might be various different scenarios of why a nurse might be in the US and why they might want to begin an adjustment of status green card. Obviously, the individual must have lawfully entered the United States and meet certain requirements. And this means that the RMA gets the green card without having returned to their home country. So the adjustment of status green card also goes through a number of stages. It is similar to the stages that are gone through, that the nurse goes through with the consulate. And there was a change recently actually with adjustment of status green cards. In years before, the nurses didn't have to go through an interview, but that is one of the changes that we're seeing right now, that adjustment of status green cards need to go through an interview as well here in the US. So that pretty much sums up the immigration piece and the licensing and credentialing pieces of the puzzle for international recruitment. And we're going to move now on to the recruitment and selection process. So you'll see here just a guide of how the recruitment and selection process might work. And obviously, you might decide if you're going to be doing international recruitment, you might decide to go ahead and do that yourself, or you might go through a recruitment company such as Kinetics. But pretty much it would go through these different steps. So the first obviously would be the selection process, which is the profiles of the nurses who've passed the NCLEX and are presented to the facility based on site visits and white paper analysis. So this site visits and white paper analysis, this is just from our side how we do it at Kinetics. And because we really focus on a holistic match, every client that we work with, we do a site visit to make sure that we understand the location, the facility, the kind of nurse that's going to be the right fit for this particular organization. So, for instance, if it's a rural area, we want to make sure that nurses are, going to be happy and want to live in a more rural area. If it's it's a large city, same kind of situation. So, pretty much looking at the location and what the requirements are from the organization to make sure that we have the right match. If it's an area where people, where you can't rely on public transportation, we have to make sure we have nurses that drive. So all kinds of practical things go into that selection process. At Kinetics, we have a proprietary tool. It's called a white paper analysis, and it's really a lot of questions. So it's a lot of questions that we ask every facility that we work with to make sure that we understand the nuances and to make sure that we get the right match. The second step is the interview process. Because most of these nurses are going to be outside the country, facilities will interview in different ways. So it might be a telephone, it might be Skype, it might be a video interview arranged between the facility and the nurse candidate. We do have some organizations that have done recruitment trips. Going to different countries, the UK, Philippines, Canada, etc. But these days we're seeing a move away from that with the technology. We started doing this years ago, that this was more common to do recruitment trips to interview nurses. But these days, it's not necessarily. I mean, if you wanted to do that, I mean, it's certainly something that can be done. But really, we see a move away from that because of the technology changes that make us able to interview with, over the phone, Skype, or video interview. The third step is the interview by the surgery center or by the hospital. So on selection, we need to have a completed immigration process, the licensure process, pre-arrival counseling, post-arrival support. And from a Kinetics perspective, we have a lot of tools and methodologies that we use to make sure that we have a smooth transition. So, just to give you some idea, we have we select at the hospital ambassadors, people at the hospital who love the facility or love the surgery center, who will be in touch with the nurses during the wait period. We set up Facebook groups. We have Facebook Live sessions with we have a dedicated team. We have licensing specialists, associated immigration lawyers that do Facebook Live sessions. We have an IELTS support group. We have a lot of tools at our disposal to make sure that it's a smooth transition. And the fourth step, of course, is the ongoing follow-up. And that's really to go back to that first slide where we show that we're on the road. This is a journey. It's very much a partnership from a facility, a nurse, and a recruitment company perspective. This is long-term partnership recruitment. This is not transactional recruitment by any means. And we, from Kinetic side, we have a dedicated team that work with our clients in order to ensure that we can have a successful partnership on all sides. The last piece of the puzzle is the onboarding best practices. So at the end of the day, it's one thing to go through this, a selection process, but it's really important to have a successful onboarding best practice. And a few key elements to bear in mind for successful onboarding. First of all, obviously, the international nurses must be the facilities. It is preferable for them to be the facilities employees. The facility will need to put together a package for the nurses, like a comprehensive package. It's important to remember that when the nurses arrive, they arrive in the US and they're not just changing jobs. They are changing everything in their lives. So they are, they don't have a social security number. They need to apply for that. They don't have a bank account. They don't have a cell phone. They don't have a driver's license. They don't have a car. There's a lot of, they have to set up housing. There's a lot of things that need to be set up when the nurses arrive in the US. So it's very important to have a package to help the nurses to make a smooth transition. Various tools, methodologies, and techniques can be used to implement to promote nurse engagement and retention. As I mentioned previously, it's very important to have a successful onboarding, orientation, and training program when the nurses arrive, because even though these are experienced nurses, there are going to be gaps, and there are going to be differences in the way that the nurses work. Even nurses coming from Canada or the UK or Australia, there are going to be differences in the way that the nurses have worked in their home country as opposed to working in the US. And in fact, we have a lot of tools that we can suggest before the nurses have arrived. So there's certain modules from our side that we suggest the nurses do on rn.com, one of the websites, to prepare them for life and work in the US. But a successful and a strong orientation and training program is something that we can help with. But it is a very important piece of the puzzle. Another important part of a successful onboarding best practice is some kind of software-based delivery management system, which is used to monitor the global delivery. So that's also going to be important to be able to help track the nurses through the process of the immigration and the licensing side. And if you work through a partner such as Kinetics, we obviously have that at our disposal, and we'll be sharing that with you. But I mean, if you decide to do this on your own, that is something that we definitely suggest to help you to track the nurses through the process, because it is a journey. I always say international nurse recruitment is not an easy process, but it can be a very successful process. Unfortunately, though, it's not a magic wand, which I know we all wish it was, but it's not. So the last slide before we finish up is just to finish off. So Kinetics hopefully will be your choice partner for international healthcare recruitment. And the question that we always ask is, when choosing a partner in international recruitment, your question shouldn't be what the partner can offer, but rather what they can deliver. Because it is really about delivery, and we hope that you would check out some of our success stories on our Facebook page to see how we have delivered in the past.
Okay, great, Tanya. That was incredibly interesting. And as people put their questions in, let me ask you some that come to mind. So an ASC calls me up. They're in crisis. They can't get enough nurses. They're going to want to know one thing. In your estimate, how long will it take to get from step one of them calling you to the nurse walking through the door?
Okay, so this is the question that we get all the time. Good question, Andrew. And unfortunately, as I said, it's not a magic wand, and you can see all the pieces of the puzzle now. So there are a lot of steps that the nurses need to go through in order to get to the US. So if the nurses are coming on a TN, that is the shorter process. If the nurses have already got a visa screen certificate, they are, so for instance, if a nurse is coming to New York and they already have a visa screen certificate, it can take anywhere from 2 to 9 months for the nurses to arrive. And the reason why there's such a big, such a big gap between from a timing perspective is it depends when they wrote the NCLEX exam. Because in Canada, they only started taking the NCLEX exam in January 2015. So if a nurse wrote the NCLEX in January 2015 or onwards, it's a much shorter process for them to come to the US. If they wrote it prior to January 2015 in Canada, they will have taken the Canadian RN, not the NCLEX, which means they have to write the NCLEX. And if they are if they had to write the NCLEX, the processing time will be longer. So if they are coming on a TN, it could be anywhere between 2 to 9 months, depending on where they are in the immigration and licensing process, and also which state they're going to. Because some states to do the endorsement take 1 to 2 months, and some states take much longer than that. If they are coming on a green card, it is based on country of birth. So if they are born in any other country besides India, Philippines, and China, right now the estimate for green cards is around a year for the nurses to arrive in the US. If they were born in Philippines and they do not, if they were born in Philippines and we file a new petition, it's around probably about 15 months. Maybe a little longer, 15 to 17 months probably, for a new Filipino petition. And if they were born in India or China, it is longer than that. So right now, we are only ever bring Indian or Chinese nurses if they have what's called a previous priority date, which means that they had a previous petition at some time over the last few years. So that's a long answer to a short question.
No. I got it. I got it. These are complex. So yes. Of course, everyone is concerned about economics. So first of all, does the nurse pay you or does the ASC pay you?
So the ASC pays us. So
okay.
The nurse does, so we don't take anything. There's no fees from the nurse. We get paid by the facility, and the nurses, and then the facility will also need to put together a package for the nurses. So that would be 2 parts of the cost process. We call ourselves career matchmakers, so it's kind of like that matchmaker fee. And then the other part would be some kind of a package which we can work with you and customize to put together for the nurses in terms of like a relocation package, something like that.
Right. And so again, staying with economics for a second, when I'm an ASC and I have to pay you X and I'm always looking to reduce expenses, can I put together a package, or is it not realistic to put together a package that might be cheaper than what I pay my, I don't know what the right word is, regular nurses?
You mean a package in terms of what you pay the actual nurses themselves?
Yes.
Or you mean?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. No, the nurses, because they are they're coming. So a lot of times they're coming on the green card. they need to be paid at least prevailing wage. So that is where that first step of the green card process is prevailing wage. So they need to be paid accordingly. So that's something that we would need to look at as the prevailing wage for that particular facility, and then look at the rates that would be commensurate with that. On the TN side, you don't have prevailing wage, but it is definitely preferable you're paying the nurses according, the same as your American nurses.
Okay, got it.
Yeah.
Let's assume we have Nurse Andrew. We really like him. He gets our culture. But I think you said the TN was 3 years. Can they reapply and get multiple TNs?
Yes, correct.
Is there a limit?
So no, there is no limit. So they can renew that TN indefinitely, technically. Most of the times after being in the U.S. for a few years, the nurse might say, and that's why I say that, that they might come to the facility and say, well, I really like it here and I want to put down roots and I want to maybe do a green card, and that's where they might look at doing an adjustment of status green card. Or they can actually do a consular green card as well. So you can do either option if you're inside the country. But they would probably look at doing an adjustment of status green card at that point. But in answer to your question, they can renew that indefinitely. And we have many facilities where we have nurses working for many, many years in that capacity.
Okay,
and you can
great.
just to mention it, and you can also just to mention as well, you can have multiple TNs. So a nurse can, for instance, work at one facility in a full-time permanent position, and then have another TN simultaneously working part-time at another facility.
And I take it that the road slide you had, we could start out with TN and then move to green?
Yes, of course. Yeah. And that's why I said, that it's really, it's a journey. I mean, it's we have some facilities that will say to us, well, let's start with Canadians because that seems like a little simpler, it's less costly, and that's kind of a route that they want to take. And there's certainly options in that. The one thing that I do want to mention, though, on the Canadian side, is that the recruitment of Canadian nurses is just as competitive as for American nurses, because many, many facilities have been recruiting in Canada now for a while, and are, it's very, very competitive.
Okay, great. So, Tanya, I know people are going to have more questions, and that's a perfect segue to just say one more thing before we call it an afternoon, and I can't thank you enough. I found this fascinating. I'm sure the audience did too. Here's the discount code if you want to register for our symposium. It's NYM18W. That's NYM18W. That will work for the next 2 days. And come and meet Kinetics and all the other sponsors and speakers. It's a one-day seminar, which thankfully ends with a cocktail hour. So Tanya, thank you very, very much. And we're also going to post this on our website so people can listen to it if they have other people they want to share with. Thank you very much.
And thank you, Andrew, and thank you to your team. We're really excited to be able to present and share the benefits of partnering on international recruitment, and I look forward to more questions next week at the seminar.
Great. Thank you. Take care.
Thank you.